Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining me for this explainer. Today, we are going to unpack a truly dramatic historical crescendo. We're diving deep into the story of exactly how Ukraine achieved its independence. We'll be looking closely at the events, the data, and the history to really understand how a sovereign nation was forged. Picture this for a second. Imagine living under the rule of a massive superpower for generations, only to watch that giant suddenly begin to crumble right before your eyes. That is exactly the question we're exploring today. What actually happens when one of the world's most powerful empires begins to collapse? For millions of people, a collapsing empire means total chaos and fear. But for Ukrainians in 1991, it meant an opportunity. As you'll see throughout this explainer, 1991 wasn't just some political pivot where freedom was conveniently handed over. No. It was an opportunity seized. It was a moment earned through decades of incredible struggle and sacrifice. Section 1, Deep Roots, Dark Decades. Ukraine's national identity didn't just pop out of nowhere in the 20th century. It stretches way back, over 1,000 years actually, to the powerful medieval civilization of Kievan Rus. In 1918, as the Russian Empire collapsed, the Ukrainian People's Republic declared independence. It was this fleeting, hopeful moment of freedom. But by 1922, civil war, foreign invasions, and Bolshevik expansion had completely crushed that dream, and Ukraine was absorbed into the newly formed Soviet Union. For the next 70 years, despite being the agricultural breadbasket of the USSR and a massive industrial engine, Ukraine lived under heavy, centralized, and often brutal control from Moscow.
And we have to pause here because that control came at a devastating cost. It is absolutely crucial to acknowledge the sheer weight of Soviet oppression. In the early 1930s, Joseph Stalin forced Ukrainian farmers into collective farms. Grain was completely confiscated. Entire villages were literally sealed off. The result was the Holodomor, a horrific, man-made famine that starved millions of Ukrainians to death. The trauma of that was just immense. And even after the devastation of World War II, Soviet control only tightened. They ruthlessly suppressed writers, intellectuals, and really any expression of Ukrainian nationalism. But here is the key takeaway. Despite these unimaginably dark decades, the desire for an independent national identity never once disappeared.
Section 2, Cracks in the Empire. Fast forward to the 1980s, and the Soviet superpower is severely struggling. We're talking widespread economic stagnation and deep corruption. So leader Mikhail Gorbachev introduces sweeping reforms to try and save the system. Perestroika, which means restructuring, and glasnost, meaning openness. But ironically, instead of saving the system, he unintentionally unlocked decades of suppressed anger. Glasnost allowed Ukrainians to finally talk openly about forbidden history, things like Stalin's purges and the Holodomor. And this sparked a massive, massive awakening of national consciousness, fueling powerful new political movements like Rukh, which started demanding democratic reforms and greater autonomy. Now, if Gorbachev's reforms opened the door, the events of April 26, 1986, completely blew it off the hinges. The Chernobyl nuclear power plant exploded in what became the absolute worst nuclear disaster in human history. But honestly, it wasn't just the explosion itself, it was the disastrous Soviet cover-up that followed. Authorities delayed evacuations. They concealed critical, life-saving information while millions were exposed to radiation. This completely and utterly shattered whatever trust remained in Moscow. It forced Ukrainians to ask a very dangerous question: why on earth should Ukraine remain under Soviet rule? For many, Chernobyl was the ultimate catalyst for change. And that shattered trust quickly turned into unified action. In January 1990, hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians formed a continuous human chain. Imagine this, a chain of people stretching all the way from Kyiv to Lviv. They were commemorating that brief moment of independence from 1918 that we talked about earlier. It was one of the largest demonstrations in Soviet history. This wasn't just a simple protest. It was an undeniable physical demonstration that the people were demanding freedom. The momentum was building, and it was building fast. Section 3, The Breaking Point.
Okay, the speed of history right here is literally breathtaking. In August 1991, hardline communists in Moscow launched a coup against Gorbachev. They sent tanks rolling into the streets trying to preserve the Soviet Union by force. But over 3 incredibly tense days, the coup collapsed, and its failure utterly destroyed the central government's remaining authority. Ukraine's leaders realized right then that this was their moment. Instantly, on August 24th, the Ukrainian parliament voted overwhelmingly, we're talking 346-1, to declare independence. By December 1, they held a national referendum. And just a week after that, on December 8th, leaders met in a forest in Belarus to sign the Belavaja Accords, officially declaring that the Soviet Union no longer existed. In just a matter of months, a global superpower simply vanished.
Section 4. The People's Mandate. So, a parliamentary declaration is one thing, but on December 1st, 1991, the citizens of Ukraine went to the polls to validate it. And the results? Absolutely staggering. Over 90% voted yes for independence. What's even more incredible is the context behind this data. Voter turnout exceeded 84%, and every single region supported it. Even areas with very large Russian-speaking populations solidly backed independence. This wasn't a divided political maneuver at all. This was a clear, unmistakable national mandate. The people of Ukraine wanted to chart their own future. But charting that future meant taking on some immense responsibilities, literally overnight. Ukraine didn't just get a new flag and a national anthem, they instantly became one of the largest countries in Europe. They inherited Europe's second largest military, a vast industrial base coupled with incredibly fertile agricultural land, and, this is a big one, the world's third largest nuclear arsenal. Suddenly, this newly sovereign nation carried massive strategic weight on the global stage. It was a huge inheritance, but it also promised an incredibly difficult and complex transition.
Section 5. An unfinished journey.
Because as we know, the transition away from Soviet rule was far from easy. It was plagued by economic collapse, corruption, and serious political instability. The true test of 1991 has really been the decades that followed. Ukrainians have had to repeatedly step up and defend the sovereignty they claimed. From the Orange Revolution in 2004 demanding fair elections, to the Euromaidan protests of 2013 and 2014, to Russia's annexation of Crimea, right up to the full-scale Russian invasion in 2022. Every single one of these modern crises has tested the nation. And every single time, it has reaffirmed the exact same fundamental truth for Ukrainians. Their independence is absolutely non-negotiable. So, as we pull all these threads together, let's anchor back to a core truth. Ukraine didn't just emerge, it re-emerged. 1991 was not some accidental byproduct of a collapsing empire. It wasn't just a lucky break. It was the direct culmination of centuries of aspiration. From the medieval glory of Kievan Rus through the fleeting freedom of 1918, past the horrors of the Holodomor and the absolute tragedy of Chernobyl, the identity of this nation survived. Independence was not gifted, it was won. The events of 1991 prove that even the mightiest empires can fall, and when they do, a people's unbreakable resilience can forge a nation. As you reflect on the data and the history we've explored today, ask yourself, how does a nation continually find the strength to pay such a high cost for freedom? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you next time.